One of the ways I describe being a founder or a co-founder is if you want to do it for a long period of time, you have to be able to be an Olympic athlete in a different sport every 6 to 12 months. So there's this incredible rate of change, rate of development that needs to happen. And then alongside that, we all are living life. And sometimes life is great. Sometimes life is really hard.
Hey, co-founders, welcome to Made It with Connor Tompkins, a podcast where we meet with badass entrepreneurs who've successfully exited their companies, discussing everything from the wins and losses of entrepreneurship to the next steps after the exit. To not miss out on these exciting stories, be sure to subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, this is the Made It podcast. We interview inventors, creators, and entrepreneurs that are shaping the world that we live in. And I'm excited to interview Luke. Luke Bonney is the founder of Redox. He raised $95 million in creating a software that helps plug into existing healthcare systems. So EHR integration, essentially. And so I'm excited to talk to you about some of the pieces of your journey from like Epic and Isaac and your background and how you plugged some of that into your company and how you were able to grow it to such a big size. But Luke, it's great to talk to you.
Yeah, super happy to be here. The only thing I would add to your background is married to a wonderful partner, 2 kids, 3 and 5, and most importantly, father to my chocolate lab, Leroy.
That's amazing. If you see behind me, I normally have like a little English cream like dachshund. That's a puppy that hasn't let me sleep in like the 2024. I haven't slept. And so, one of the things that comes up a lot in this podcast, because we talk to a lot of entrepreneurs that have ended up selling or parting ways with their business, is that it gets a little tricky whenever people ask you, like, what do you do? And then you come up with like a different answer every time, you know, like, what do you do? Well, I garden, you know, like I lift weights on Tuesday, maybe do the occasional push-up. But
I've been growing a beard since 2010. So that'll be a consistent part of my identity from then to now.
That's a 13-year-old beard right there. 14, I don't even know what year I'm in. But one of the things that, Luke, we have in common is we were in Isaac together, which is this international organization that brings young people to go work for different companies in different countries. And essentially you're running like a little nonprofit inside a university, but that little nonprofit's tied to 143 different countries and hundreds of thousands of alumni. How was that experience for you? And how did any of that come into Redox? Did you apply any of like the retreats or any of the organizational development stuff?
When I came into college, I was totally on the pre-med path. You know, I was studying neurobiology at Cornell with 450 other people fighting tooth and nail to make it to med school. And I ran across this crazy student organization that proclaimed they were going to change the world by having students go and work and live in other countries. And it was the first time my eyes kind of opened up to this whole idea of building and creating and being an entrepreneur. So I joined it, ended up running the chapter at Cornell, and learned an incredible amount. I think real leadership, one of the ways you can define real leadership is, can you lead people who don't have a financial incentive to work with you? So leading volunteers.
Yes.
It forces you to lead and deeply understand how to connect to people. So I think I took a ton from that. I think the big thing I took from Isaac is the power of a big, bold purpose that can truly move people, especially when you make it super tangible. And that was definitely something that I brought to Redox, was, you know, proclaiming that we felt we could really change healthcare and make the world better for every patient and every provider. And here's how we're going to do that. Do you want to be a part of this?
Kind of like a part joke there. Like if you've ever seen the Silicon Valley TV show where they're like talking about like this garage remote opener widget that will change the world and open up new doors in your, you know, and there's that, right? And then they're kind of poking fun. And on the other side, if you do have like that clear, big, hairy, audacious goal / vision that you can unite the company behind, that you can like base decisions off of, or that you could see. Like with Isaac, you're actually having international young people come and live inside your city or go work, and you're actually interacting with these people and getting exposure from people you wouldn't normally interact with. It kind of brings it home a little bit.
The part that Isaac where they really got me was it was founded in the late 1940s as a response to World War II, where students were like, what's a solution that could prevent World War III? And the basic idea was if we have enough people live and work in other countries, we could meaningfully we could have a society where there's enough understanding and connectivity to prevent the next World War. And that was where I was like, oh shit, like you could go for something like that and come up with a solution that could mean something. So like for me, you have to believe it. It has to be authentic. Anything that you don't believe or isn't authentic is the exact same thing as the remote opening doors.
I do think that I took some of the leadership principles and some elements of like, how do you create a company or organization that's worth working for, even if you weren't paying them, and applied it to some of the businesses that I wanted to run. So like retreats, philanthropy, engagement activities happening every single week, professional development stuff happening, social activities, how we design the workspace, right? And so I think there is a little bit of play there where you're like, they could work for any company. Why would they work for mine?
Totally.
Beyond pay. So I think that had a little bit of a role. Epic is in Wisconsin, and you also worked there. I heard their office space is kind of crazy and / nuts in like the best way possible.
I think the actual designers of their campus, I don't know if this is still the case, but when they first designed it, they had two firms work together. One was the firm that designed Microsoft's campus outside of Seattle, and the other firm was the one that designed Disney's campus. And that's very tangibly what you experience when you show up. Their thesis is hire incredibly smart people with any sort of background from anywhere across the country, move them to Madison, Wisconsin, train them. And, they've built a multi-billion-dollar company. Their talent strategy is kind of unmatched, and the campus is as much for them as it is for customers.
This is a health tech company, right? Like this is a company that's focusing on like, this is not Disneyland. This is not a tourist destination for people to go to. It's a place for people to work. You guys were remote first, right? So you guys had people everywhere.
When we started Redox, we kind of went the opposite way from Epic. There's tons of stuff because me and the two other co-founders, that's where we met each other. That's where we learned about healthcare IT, kind of the world of technology and healthcare. And there were some things we took from how that company was run, and there was other things that we didn't. And one of those was just the idea of attempting to convince people to all live in the same place. We just saw the world headed in a different direction. So from the very beginning, the way I would describe it is kind of the ethos was of Madison, but we, the three founders, we were in Madison, and our first three employees, one was in LA, one was in Fort Collins, and the other was in State College, Pennsylvania. So from the very, very beginning, we decided to build a distributed company.
That's pretty cool. Did you guys ever have a physical site, or was it 100% like virtual?
Early on, we did quarterly, what we call team weeks, where we'd bring everybody together. As the company got bigger and bigger, they went from quarterly to every half year. Now we have that like once a year, and then at the off half of the year, there's team retreats. But the way I think about it is operating virtually, operating in a distributed way is super efficient and awesome, and it extends a lot of trust to the employees. What's hard to do remotely is build relationships. So that's really the focus when we brought people together was how do we build relationships as quickly as possible and then put them in place so they can be utilized when it's time to get work done for the rest of the year.
Probably half our people remote, and we also did the retreat kind of process, right? And we had different breakouts in different countries and different locations. How did you orchestrate that?
We would, even now when we do it, we think once a year everybody needs to be at one spot. And the way we're starting to balance that is the team-based retreats, they get to pick wherever they want to go. But where healthcare data gets tricky, there's, HIPAA and other regulations. They really don't want healthcare. Well, it's mandated that the certain types of healthcare data don't leave the U.S. So you can outsource some things, but but there has to be a really hard line with anybody who could come in contact with what's called PHI, personal health information. So for that reason, we are fully distributed across the U.S., but the vast majority of people need to be in the U.S., need to be domestic.
That makes sense. You recently went through that transition of stepping down and transitioning to another CEO. How has that experience been?
It is without a doubt one of the most intense and difficult decisions of my life, in all honesty. Plenty of sleepless nights kind of thinking through it. For me, I really thought about it in two ways. The first was, what's the right thing for the company? And then the second was, what's the right thing for me? And then obviously there's a Venn diagram where those things overlap in the middle. From a company standpoint, Redox is now at a size and a scale and really a level of complexity where it was the first time I really felt somebody who had experienced that level of scale could come in and ultimately drive more impact, more value, more shareholder value. And then on the what's right for me, you heard me mention I have a 3-year-old Leona and a 5-year-old Zeke, my partner Kelsey, and I had told myself for a long time that I could be the CEO the company needed, I could be the father that Zeke and Leona needed, I could be the partner that Kelsey needed. But it just became clearer and clearer to me that I was not being honest with myself. And the framework that I use to ultimately make the decision is a well-known framework, which is like, put yourself on your deathbed, look back on your life, and ask yourself, what would you think is a better choice, to put in another 3 years of Redox or to put that time into, really being with your family? And for me, it became like crystal clear. It was just like, I think it might be the right thing for Redox, and this is definitely the right thing for me. So I came to that conclusion in the spring. I had an executive coach who was critical and, kind of being there to help me talk about it. And then I brought it to the board in the summer. And then, we decided to do a search within the board for the next CEO. And I'll say it like this. I was fully prepared to be in seat, knowing we were looking for a new CEO for a long time, like a year. And it wasn't a couple of weeks where I got a phone call from one of the board members that said, literally the best CEO I've ever worked with, whose most recent gig was taking a company of about Redox's size, 5Xing it. He's, been working at the acquirer of that company and is ready for his next thing. He just called me and he's interested in Redox. Then I got on the phone with him and I was like, wow, this guy's great. Like, I think something's got to be wrong.
Were you like probing him and you're like, what sports team do you support? Or like,
he really was the right guy on paper and the right guy from, we don't share 100% of values, but the deep, most important ones we do. And I say all this because, at least for me, knowing that the company is in good hands and really believing that Tripp, the new CEO, is the guy, was critical. I would be a basket case right now if I felt like the predecessor that we brought in wasn't adequate.
Something that I still struggle with is that you build this company thinking like, oh, it's going to last forever. Like that pub in Japan that's been around for like 500 years. But it's almost like you're building like a sandcastle. Like, it's nice for the duration that you have and that timeline that you have. But nothing lasts forever. And then also, like, it takes a different skill set to be a CEO of a certain size company versus the next stage.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of those crazy things of mental jujitsu that founders have to go through, which is like, you have to believe you could be building a world-changing company that could last forever. And then on the other side, rationally knowing that 1 out of 100 make it, most of them are going to fail. And even the successful ones, the outcome is likely you get purchased or acquired or rolled up or whatever. I was lucky. I really do consider myself lucky, because one of my anxieties as a first-time co-founder CEO was this thought that, it was like one of my nightmare scenarios, which is I could be the CEO at Redox and be the last person to know I should no longer be the CEO at Redox, right? It's like the classic, the emperor's wearing no clothes. And because of that, early on, I I got to the point where I was able to kind of separate myself, my identity from the role. And I know this sounds a little conceptual, but hopefully you know, somebody who's lived through it, it's like it's like, who am I if I am not the CEO of this company? And I consider myself lucky because I pulled those things apart earlier than going through this decision.
One of the things that stood out is that you had like a transition plan and you had like an announcement and you're like, I came to this decision. I talked about it with my coach. I talked about it with my board, you know, like that doesn't normally happen. I mean, like,
it's true.
You can be an amazing CEO and yet you can show up to work in one day and the board will just be like, hey, we like Tom, you know, or like, this is like we're changing direction. And you're like, or there could be it could be any number of things, right? You sell your company to a strategic or you sell your company to a financial buyer. And then you're not just adapting to the fact that you sold your company and that some decisions might be made or that are different. But you're also adjusting to a change in your lifestyle as far as financially, and you're dealing with this change in identity at the same time inside this group that we're a part of, and they're all navigating what the next thing is, or how do they adjust? And there seems to be like a few different camps. There's some people that are like, I'm retired, I'm done, you know, and then there's some people that are like spinning up a family office or a venture studio or something like that. Which way do you see yourself going?
That's a great question. I mean, this is currently what I'm 4 months in. I've decided that I'm taking a sabbatical, you know, and I really don't know what's at the end of the sabbatical other than what I'm calling a life redesign. The second kind of core principle or concept that I believe in now is that life is built on chapters. And for me, at least, like, my chapter of building Redox was really scratching a different itch than I think the upcoming chapter is all about. Redox to me was kind of two big things. One was a forcing function for me to become the best version of myself. It's kind of like, hey, we talk about potential. How do you realize potential? How about you put yourself in a position to be all skin in the game? I believed in that. I believed in being part of something with real purpose that could change the world. Today, the itch I want to scratch is to be an incredible father, be an incredible husband, and to put all that into, you know, my family and my community. So and I could try to intellectualize that. Maybe it's biology, maybe it's other parts of my life. I don't know, but I know that when I really sit and listen to myself, there's just something different at the core of what's motivating me right now. So I say that because it actually takes a lot of pressure for me off of what's next, because it's not what's next forever. It's just what's next for now. And I don't know, but I'm pretty excited to figure it out.
I think it's good to recognize that, because I know that there's some people with entrepreneurship, it never ends. You can always start another business. You can always continue to keep on going. But not a lot of people kind of think about what phase of life that they're in and how do you want that lifestyle to kind of flow into the business that you're going to run.
What I will say is I really don't feel there's a prescription. You know, I think humanity is vast and people have different paths to walk down. What I hope for everybody is that they have a chance to be really still and listen and ask themselves what is really in there, and to shut out the noise, whether it's your own projections or other people's projections, and just kind of sit with it and be like, what is pulling me right now at the deepest level? And if you listen to that, I don't think there's a bad answer, right? Like you're gonna figure it out. But yeah, I wish for everybody that there was moments when you could find that time to really be quiet and to listen.
Some of us also don't have patience for that. So it's like, can you hold still? And you're like, I don't know if I can hold still. I don't know if that's an option.
Well, that's an interesting question all on its own.
100%. So you started this with a couple partners, right? What are your partners up to?
Yeah, so there was 3 of us who started the company. You know, at the beginning, all 3 of us, Yeah, I think it was Y Combinator who talked about the fact that 2 or 3 person founder teams are way more likely to be successful. The Redox story, I think, is a massive testament to that. We each believed in this huge thing, but had very different and complementary skill sets. And yeah, I mean, all of us, if you look at who we are now versus who we were when we started the company, all 3 of us have grown tremendously. Nico, one of the other co-founders, is actually in the process of starting his next company. Super excited about that. James, the other co-founder, technical co-founder and CTO, he's operating a brewery and doing advising for companies and some angel investing. I understand why co-founder relationships are so hard, and it's because there are these kind of extreme forces, especially when you are growing and successful and you have people betting on you, whether it's be investors or employees or whatever. It's one of these things. One of the ways I describe being a founder or a co-founder is, if you want to do it for a long period of time, you have to be able to be an Olympic athlete in a different sport every 6 to 12 months. It's like what the company needs from you should be different every 6 to 12 months. So there's this incredible rate of change, rate of development that needs to happen. And then alongside that, we all are living life. And sometimes life is great. Sometimes life is really hard. And the founder relationships, that's all a microcosm of all these different things happening. And one of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that the 3 of us are still super close friends. We still trust each other. We still love each other. But yeah, it was not always easy. There were some tough days for sure.
Having a co-founder that you can go through all that stuff with and then see the other side is remarkable. And it's something that, like, if I think back on it, that partnership is like the unicorn. It's like, yeah, the company grew a lot, but to have someone that you trust and respect and have worked through all those different stages and come out on the other side, despite everything, like having a normal relationship without any strain is hard,
That's hard enough.
Yeah. And you have a board that you're reporting to. You have a bunch of employees that are counting on you and pulling you different ways. You have initiatives that you're trying to push. It's hard because a lot of people start companies with the person that's right for that moment. And for that person to be the right person for every moment thereafter is like, that's incredibly lucky,
One of the things that I feel blessed with is all 3 of us, I think, were driven by a similar question, which is, how do I serve the company? And I was a CEO for the time I was a CEO, but then obviously made the decision to no longer be the CEO. James and Nico, the other 2 co-founders, had multiple shifts in how they were leading and supporting and being part of the company. And I think that takes an incredible amount of self-awareness and an incredible amount of introspection to be able to check the ego. Because I think so many people, what you said, I think is really specific, just to call it out, which is many people tie their identity to a specific role or specific way to serve, and that can very quickly ossify. And I think that's where stuff starts to go sideways, is, are you willing to ask the question that, as a co-founder, my job is to help this company in the best way I can help this company, which might look different from day to day and from year to year. And I just think that that's one of those where it's like the human psychology to be able to do that and do that with grace is very rare.
I think we hold on to it because that's our way of relating to the outside world, right? That title is a way to, like, people need to see that and then 0.3 seconds and then make a judgment of how they're going to treat you. And that's tricky. And you need to be okay with, they're going to treat me however they're going to treat me. Were there some tactics that you guys used to help get some of the growth and some of the scale that you guys were able to achieve?
I think that there are different playbooks for different situations. I was thinking about this question. The first kind of dimension that I cut it across is the different phases of company growth. Like, you have your startup phase, you have your product market fit phase, you have your initial scale, and then real scale. And each of those, I think, if you're talking about growth, each of those have I think, different mental models or frameworks. Like in a startup, it's like anybody totally made up.
Type on a keyboard.
Yes, it's like, oh, you'll pay me any money? Okay, cool. We're gonna be best friends. And then with product market fit, you have to start making choices of it's not just everybody who will say yes, it's will my solution work for them? So you have to start to figure out some of these people who I want to work with might not work for me. And then, as you get further on, you got to figure out how to become repeatable, how you hire people and give them the tools to successfully go and scale. So there's that dimension. I think earlier on, one of the big things that we came to note is we really felt we were creating a new category in healthcare, this kind of reusable infrastructure category. So we were studying, because that's different. That's a different strategy and approach than I'm building the next but better version of something that already exists. It takes a different psychological framing for the market. So with that in mind, there was this guy, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Roberge, and he had a book that basically evangelized content-driven inbound sales. And that was one of the things that we really focused on, which it was all about thought leadership, content leadership. And then the idea is by the time somebody's coming to you, they've fully self-selected on many of the criteria. So early on with Redox, what that tangibly looked like, we were very focused on building the brand. We would speak at any conference. We'd speak at any pitch competition. We literally, in 1 year, we lived at 3 or 4 different accelerators, not because we wanted to be a part of the accelerators, but because our customers were at the accelerators. So it was how to build brand awareness to really own and define this new category. And that had huge payout over time. I mean, Redox, I always say we fought way above our weight class because everybody in healthcare IT, healthcare technology had heard of Redox. And it's because we were shouting our message from the mountaintop from the very beginning.
CEOs are either external or internal, and they really struggle with kind of bouncing back and forth, and then that sliding scope of looking at something very closely versus big picture. So it's not only do you have to go inside the company, outside the company, you have to look at what's happening holistically, and then someone's having a personal issue and you need to be there at that level, And so it's pretty cool that you guys are able to keep your external kind of relationships in place.
Yeah, just to your point, the whole, are you operating outside the company, inside the company, this, that? I mean, those are really hard questions to answer. And the bigger the company got, I had somebody who told me one time, I think we were probably 50 to 75 employees. And he said, Luke, you have to stop working in the company and start working on the company. For me, that was my job is I need to be able to visualize the company and at any given point know what is the most important thing to be working on, whether it's the interface with the external world, whether it's products we need to launch, customers that are upset, or how we're organized. But that working in the company, I think, is something that I really struggled with, and I see so many people struggle with, which is you could work 100 hours a week just doing the shit that you see or other people are telling you need to be done within the company. And you will not be moving the company forward. You'll just be doing the litany of things that you could solve, right? So,
which is crazy to think about, because it might be you're patting yourself on the back, I did it.
Totally.
I did a task. Congratulations. It's not going to move the needle.
Guess what? Anybody could have done that task. The hardest question are what are the things only you can do,
right? And
therefore try and shut all those other things down.
There's only one person that's going to go out and be where should I be? Oh, okay. I think what got to me the most, and I think the cry and shower kind of thought was the daunting task of, am I where I need to be at this moment? And am I doing the right thing? Because that question never goes away. Even when you're doing something that's like really high value, you're always wondering if there's something of slightly more incremental value.
There's a Peter Drucker is like the grandfather of business writing, and his opus is this book called Effective Executive, and one of his chapters is all about decision making. And one of the things he really talks about, which I tried to use all the time, which was like, what's the one decision you can make that would make 10 other decisions easier? And it was the whole idea of like, stop swatting flies, close the window. And just exactly what you're talking about, which is like that paranoia of, I'm like working on a smaller level problem. It's like, how can you zoom this up and see the bigger level problem, and work on that?
It's kind of hard because people might call you out and be like, why aren't you addressing this issue? And you have to say, this is important, but, and sometimes you might not even be able to tell them a reason.
That's right. Totally agree.
So I was listening to a podcast that you were on. It's The Bigger Narrative with Andy Raskin. And one of the things I loved, I've never seen this done on a podcast, was like he gets on the phone with his mom and he tries to describe what Redox does. It's like the most clever way I've ever heard of like introducing
Andy
this idea of
Raskin
API.
He's so brilliant. He's the best. I love Andy Raskin.
And so I kind of have to like ask you, if you were to break down what Redox does for Andy Raskin's mom.
For Andy Raskin's mom.
And for our moms. Like how would you break it down?
For moms of from anywhere, the way I describe it is we're healthcare data plumbers. We build pipes to pump healthcare data from one place to another, and along the way make sure it's clean and potable.
That's a good way to put it. Did your parents have a little bit of a hard time with kind of understanding what you were up to?
I mean, I don't think they ever really got it from like a super technical standpoint. I would say things like, we're integrated with 5,000 hospitals and tens of thousands of clinics. They'd be like, holy shit. But that wasn't a huge deal. Like the relationship that I have with them, it was like my dad's always been super supportive. He was the one, I think I mentioned I was originally going to school to be a doctor and go to med school. And when I had that realization, I didn't want to do that. I called my dad and he's like, why don't you just like do this ISEC thing? And that resulted in me like leaving school for a period of time and living in Egypt on a traineeship.
Oh, that's awesome.
But when I left Epic and they were like, Luke, why are you leaving this job at this great company that you tell us you really like? And I was like, because I'm kind of getting bored. They're like, that doesn't sound like a great reason. I laid it all out and I was like, I know I want to start a company. I want to give it a shot. I've given myself like, I'm not going to go in debt. What if the savings account hits zero? I'll go get a real job, all that stuff. And then it's like kind of started to work. And I think they were like, holy shit. This isn't just a 9-month, lark. But, I just think what they cared about was I doing something that I really loved. And they're like, they needed to be able to explain it to their friends. That was like as much as of the ground we needed to cover. Because I was very transparent. I was like, we do some weird, heavy technical stuff in the guts of healthcare that, I do think is changing lives. The most important thing is that I'm doing it for the right reasons. And yeah, some of our customers are probably people that and have interacted with. And that was really all they needed. They didn't dig too much past that.
I think that's important. And it's also like, it's nice to have a different space with people that know you from.
Totally.
It's nice to have those longer term friends. It's nice to have a family that gets together on a recurring basis. My favorite introduction was like, he's an entrepreneur, but he's employed. It's like my favorite. He's an entrepreneur, but he has healthcare.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything that is making you excited or optimistic about the upcoming couple of years as far as like entrepreneurship projects that you think are interesting or trends in healthcare that you think might spark your interest.
What we're able to do with large language models and generative AI, I think, is absolutely poised to change whole industries, healthcare being one of them. I think at the end of the day, if you net it all out, I think it's going to make a lot of the huge companies huger, but I also think patients and providers stand to benefit a ton. Healthcare is just like classic in terms of where I think AI can have really, really big, really, really meaningful impact. So I'm excited about that. I was just having a conversation earlier today with somebody who further solidified some of my thinking that so when we started Redox, one of the big things was the cloud, and being able to take advantage of that from an infrastructure standpoint and all, democratizing access, pulling down barriers for starting businesses. I think in the next couple of years, the ability to start a business and get to revenue very quickly will be unlike anything we've ever seen. Like, you don't even need to have to hire people, right? So you look at what the large language models are doing, and then you look at the ability to source across the web. I think there's a whole new wave of, it's not just new businesses, it's like the way in which we start new businesses is going to change.
Kind of causing different issues though. So like if it's easier to start a
Totally.
website, spin up content, create a product, and you have more saturation. And then it's like, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you provide more
Totally.
value?
I don't necessarily believe that there's going to be a larger number of massively successful companies. I think there will be more like a longer tail of much more niche companies, just because it's going to be easier and easier to start them, and it's going to take less and less capital to operate them. And then the third thing I'm super interested in is, for me personally, I'm super interested to work alongside and to help founders and executives. I don't know if starting another company is next for me, or if it's more the coaching and advising around. I'm not sure, but I do have, like, personally, I have this whole figure out how to share. Like, I'm sure you feel this, but it's like, how do I help people suffer a little less because of all the shit I had to deal with?
There has to be a better way.
There has to be, and maybe there isn't, but I believe there might be. But that's kind of the third thing.
Similar to you is I'm looking at these entrepreneur organizations, and I'm trying to figure out, like, why did it take me so long to get plugged into some of these different entrepreneur organizations? And it's for a wide variety of different reasons. Like, you don't know that they exist, and even if you do know, there might be a barrier as far as how much revenue you have to generate to get to that point. And maybe they don't have a chapter in your city. And
Right.
I think there is more room for people that have gone through the process and exited and talking about their experiences. And sometimes
Right.
I'm watching TikTok and I'm like, I don't think this person has ran a business, or they would be saying this.
Yes.
Probably not the move.
I wish it could be less lonely. I think that's probably one of the hardest things. I think that there are people who probably give up, throw in the towel, because they don't have any sort of community, and they haven't figured out how to build relationships with people, because you can't do it in your business. You can't really do it with your board. There's so much knowledge, and knowledge for running a company is always so narrowly specific to your context. But it's like, if everybody had a couple more people they could call up that they could relate to, maybe that would help,
I think part of it is that there's more expectations for the CEO to provide, like, an environment where people are able
Totally.
to socialize and connect with and provide more than just work. And I think if you were like a small business owner and you were running a shop 80 years ago, like, the expectations are a little bit different than if you're, you have to make sure that you're saying the right things and working with 14 different departments the
100%.
right way. And that's kind of lonely. So, Luke, I appreciate the chat. Where should people find you? Or another question is, where should people not find you if you don't want to be found?
I have exactly zero presence on social media by design. So do not seek me out on social media.
Do not find me.
If you really want to get a hold of me, send me a note on LinkedIn. I do check that fairly regularly. If people want to chat, they can reach out to you, and you can send along my email address and all that stuff. But I kind of am in one of these periods of being a little internally facing, a little bit more cocooning. But I'll be back at some point. But But yeah, I'm not huge into social media, so you can find me on LinkedIn.
I think that makes sense, Luke. It's good to have you on the pod, and we'll be talking soon.
Great. Thanks for having me. This is great.
That wraps up today's episode. For more inspiring stories and valuable lessons from successful entrepreneurs, be sure to listen and subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and writing your next chapter.